President Trump and President Xi talk trade in a phone call that they say was long and productive. And already Trump has downgraded the trade war to trade skirmish. So has Xi charmed the American president into smoothing over trade frictions? And with US midterms just days away, which way is America leaning? Will Trump suffer a bloody nose, or will he emerge stronger and bolder than ever? Plus, Iran is bracing itself for yet another throw of Trump's sanctions dice. But what does that mean for the oil industry and Iran's trading partners? Welcome to The Point. I'm Jeff Moody, sitting in for Leo Sheen. Well, they talked at length today, the leaders of the world's two largest economies, and they talked trade. After the phone conversation, which was initiated by President Trump, came to an end, he took to Twitter, as usual, saying his conversation with the Chinese president was, and I quote, "a long and very good conversation." Well, shortly after, the Chinese president, Xi Jinping, gave his take on the call, not by Twitter, saying that both leaders have good visions for a healthy, stable development of China-US relations, as well as expanding economic and trade cooperation. But what was actually said? We know that President Xi says he will meet Trump at the G20 summit in Argentina. We know that Trump now says the trade war is no more than a little skirmish between friends. Historically, the two leaders have developed a special, strong bond since the beginning. But is that bond enough to end the market jitters over China-US trade? And what do we make of the timing of the call, just days before America goes to the polls in crucial midterm elections? Well, I'm joined in the Beijing studio by Sitao, the chief economist at Deloitte, China, and in Shanghai by Greg Nance, Truman Scholar of the University of Chicago. Gentlemen, welcome to the program. Greg, let's start with you, if I may. Now, the cynic in me would suggest that Trump is in danger of receiving a battering from businesses in the States who are really beginning to feel the pinch of this trade war, and he's phoning his mate Xi Jinping with his eyes firmly on the midterm elections. Am I right to be cynical?
I think you're exactly right to be cynical. Timing is everything. The fact that this phone call is taking place today, right before Americans go to the polls, I think tells us what we need to know. The tweet is obviously engineered to engineer a stock market bump to restore some consumer confidence. And so I think your skepticism is well-founded.
But it's still good, though, isn't it? It's still good that the two are talking. And President Xi is no fool. He's going to know exactly what President Trump's up to, isn't he?
Yes, he is. I think the two have built some personal rapport throughout their previous interactions, but President Xi is very sophisticated, knows exactly where China's interests lie, and he's looking for the right bargain. And I think in his perspective, President Trump may have overplayed his hand with the first $250 billion worth of tariffs here. And so Trump now is trying to walk that back to restore consumer confidence, get the Dow Jones back up to where he'd like it to be, and get the narrative back on the roaring economy rather than on this coming trade war or trade skirmish, however it might be rebranded.
It's interesting that you bring up the relationship between the two, because I want to bring in Sitao now. I mean, we know from Trump's tweet that the conversation was long, it was very good, which is pretty much what's been said about every time the two leaders have met. They've definitely got a rapport between them, haven't they? How important do you think that rapport, that relationship, the charm between the two of them has been in this thawing process? I mean, they get on, don't they?
Yes, I mean, since the initial visit in Florida, but I wouldn't want to overestimate the personal relationship. And in the end, it's about national interest. I think it is good if we see some progress on stored trade talk, because so far this stored trade talk has really hurted stock market consumer confidence, not just in two countries. But I wouldn't just say it's a skirmish. What's going to happen in Argentina? Still, I think a lot of issues have to be resolved.
Greg, Trump's now asked his team to draw up an agreement, a potential trade agreement with China. This seems like very good news. This feels like maybe the end is in sight for this battle, war, skirmish, however we're describing it.
Trump would like us to believe that moving into the midterms for a host of reasons, as we've discussed here. I don't think it's that simple. I think there are real substantive issues that the countries need to work through. And it's typical of any bilateral relationship, let alone one so large and so important as the Chinese-American bilateral relationship. And that includes IP protections, trade secret protections, import-export duties. And you're now looking at $250 billion worth of tariffs here with the threat of $267 billion more. There are real issues here that a simple press release the day before the midterms won't be able to paper over. And so we've kind of seen this movie before, whether with the North Korea situation in Singapore with the summit there, or with an arms control discussion with Putin. I don't think Americans will be fooled. We know that this is a really difficult situation. There's a lot to work through. And this is really the first step of many. It's a marathon that we've got to run. This is a couple steps off the start line.
Sitao, I know I keep going back to this, but President Xi, I want to talk about the personalities of the two of them here and how that comes into play. President Xi has talked endlessly, doesn't he, about a win-win situation. It's one of the phrases that he comes out with again and again and again. And the expectations for this agreement, at least from the Chinese side, will be that both sides benefit equally. Win-win, it's a term that Xi Jinping uses frequently, but it's not a term in Trump's vocabulary, particularly when he's doing deals, is it?
Well, I do think can be win-win, and as you said in the beginning of the program, and perhaps this win-win situation can be achieved, perhaps by giving President Trump some headline victories, whether during the midterm election or not. That's a separate issue. But if you look at this bilateral relationship, just trade, the average tariff in the United States is between 2 to 3%. In China, it's about 8%. So there's actually a lot of room for China to bring down the tariffs rate, and there's immense room for China to open market. The reality is some of the requests from the United States may seem outrageous, but they are sort of in line with China's domestic reform agenda in the long run. So I do think there's going to be a win-win situation.
Sitao, whether this is a war, a battle, or a skirmish, however we're going to call it, it's certainly a fight, and there are certainly casualties on both sides. Give me a sense, if you will, of the effect that this war, battle, skirmish has had on investors and consumers and companies.
Oh, yeah, sure. So if we look at China, United States, U.S. is a large continental economy. Chinese economy is more depending on international trade. So the trade war would result in higher inflation for China in the short run, and also Chinese investors and consumers with Chinese, sometimes we tend to act in a herd mentality manner. So that's what happened in the stock market in past few months. And in the long run, as you also know, there is an issue of global supply chain. So some of the large global companies, they may have to look into this. If the trade war, or whether it's a skirmish, is turning into a new normal.
New normal indeed. Well, let's hope it's not a new normal. Let's hope that something changes, whether it be because of the charm of the two characters involved or not, we don't know. But for now, Greg Nance and Sitao, thank you both very much indeed. We've got to take a short break. But when we come back, plenty more still to come. First, Halloween, then the US midterm elections. As the song from that well-known Halloween musical goes, is it a jump to the left or a step to the right for America? And is the prospect of a strengthened Trump just one scary thought too far? Stay with us. It seems like it was only yesterday. Unbelievably, though, it's been 2 years since Trump and Hillary Clinton battled it out to be President of the United States. We've only just got used to calling Trump president, and here we are now facing US midterm elections with just 4 days to go. Election fever is in full force with two issues dominating debates: healthcare and immigration. Trump and co have been shouting about immigration for what seems like years, and as if to remind voters of their message, a steady stream of migrants are right now plodding through Mexico towards the border in what Trump calls, somewhat contentiously, an invasion. On the healthcare battleground, Democrats are banging the healthcare drum again, as they have been for decades. The Republicans have thrown the biggest shade of them all on that plan. They're calling the plan socialist. So why is socialism suddenly a dirty word in the States? Is this election a good old-fashioned fight between those big beasts, socialism and capitalism? And what next for socialism stateside? And what treats might be in store for avid election addicts like me over the coming days? I'm still joined in the Beijing studio by Sitao, the chief economist at Deloitte, China, and in Shanghai by Greg Nance, Truman Scholar of the University of Chicago, staying with us for that. Thank you both very much. Let's start with you, Greg. I know this is your expertise, so if you will, I'm going to concentrate on you for a few minutes here. Trade, DPRK, Iran, Paris Climate Accord, economy, jobs, so many issues. Why then is this election being fought on immigration and healthcare? Why are those the two big political hot potatoes at the moment?
Great question, and part of it is how the narrative really coalesces. James Carville, former strategist for President Bill Clinton, famously said, "It's the economy, stupid." And I think many people with healthcare and the spiraling costs around healthcare, and with immigration, a little bit of fear about, is my job really stable? Can I hang on to this, or am I going to be displaced? It's the economy, stupid, in so many ways. And Democrats, as you put it, they're really focusing on healthcare. Republicans looking to distract from their own disastrous sidesteps into the healthcare debate are trying to focus in on immigration, a place where they can exhibit some strength and take the offensive, whereas they feel like they're on the defensive with healthcare. So you're right, the battleground is forming here with only 4 days to go.
In fairness, Greg, the Democrats have been trying to push through a successful Medicare for all scheme for decades and decades. I mean, they nearly did it with Obamacare, but no cigar at the end of the day. So why is it so important to them, and why is it beyond their grasp?
I think it's a fundamental tenet since really these debates kind of emerged and began during the Great Depression and the aftermath, around World War II and immediately thereafter. And you're right, this has been a decades-long initiative and project. And in so many ways now, as the rest of the developing industrialized world continues to show what a single-payer healthcare system with universal healthcare, really large economies of scale and huge benefits, not only for cost savings, but also for quality of life and the actual healthcare delivery. More and more Americans are taking note of that. Hey, folks elsewhere have a pretty good system. We could actually learn something from that. And you're right, getting that close with the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, there's a lot of hunger now to kind of finish the job. And we're seeing that in the data now with polls of individual citizens. We're seeing that with politicians having a little more courage to now pursue this initiative.
But of course, critics and Republicans have branded this Medicare for all policy as socialist, which is not historically a very positive term when it comes to the US. Conservative warnings of socialist plots by Democrats are certainly nothing new. I mean, in 1961, Ronald Reagan accused the Democrats, who created a government-managed health care program for the elderly, of waging an incremental effort to turn the US into a, in his words, freedom-crushing socialist state. Here we are half a century over, same old argument.
Same old argument, and in a lot of senses it's used because it can work. There are a lot of folks on the fence that don't know a ton about the nuances of healthcare policy, but they do know that they rely on Medicare. And when someone claims that, hey, this is socialism, it's going to fall apart, you're going to lose these benefits that you've been paying into for decades, that fear can motivate you to vote a certain way. And so it's no surprise that Republicans are bringing this argument forward. We read President Trump's editorial in the USA Today last month, and it's full of assertions of this kind. Much of it doesn't bear reflection in reality. It's socialism, it's going to destroy the system, and yet there isn't really a serious effort actually at diving into the numbers, because a lot of studies commissioned reflect that there could be huge cost savings with single-payer health care, from administrative costs that are reduced, from the government being able to have massive economies of scale, and no longer different private insurers gouging individual consumers or holding those with pre-existing conditions without good care, or putting them into a junk pool with huge premiums, huge out-of-pocket expenses every time you go to the hospital. So back to your question, the crux of it is there's a lot of scare tactics because it motivates voters to vote a certain way. And we're going to continue seeing that, not just in the 2018 midterms, but well into the future as well.
Well, yes, I mean, in that USA Today article that you quoted, he said, if Democrats win control of Congress this November, we will come dangerously closer to socialism in America. I just want to move this on to the UK. I'm British, for my sins. We have in the United Kingdom a fully socialised healthcare system. You know, the hospitals are paid for, the employers are paid, employees are paid for, clinics, you know, if there's something wrong with me, I just have to go to the doctor. Okay, it might take weeks to get an appointment, but I know I'm secure that I can just go to the doctors and get myself treated, and whatever I need to get me better, I can have for free. Is that the type of system that the Democrats are trying to introduce in the US?
Yeah, so I don't think there's a monolithic Democratic position. I think really there's a spectrum of views. And so Medicare for all is a common buzzword right now that folks are kind of diving into. And really I think a lot of Democrats are pragmatic. They view it as a step-by-step kind of iteration toward universal health care. And so what a lot of folks are behind Medicare for all are looking for, instead of Medicare, which currently helps those age 65 and over, they would like to extend those benefits from 65 all the way down to 0. So from the time you're born, you have this coverage. Specifically for seniors, increasing dental insurance, vision, and hearing, and then reducing the cost of prescription drugs and out-of-pocket expenses as they go. And so those are core tenets. There are others like Bernie Sanders that would love to take it 3 steps further. And there are others that are in more swing states or more moderate situation that want to really take it 1 step at a time and build on Obamacare's protections for those with pre-existing conditions. One of the things that polls really, really well in all of these healthcare polls, folks want to protect themselves and loved ones because half of Americans actually are dealing with pre-existing conditions of one type or another. And so when polls suggest only 1/3 of Americans are actually buying into the Republican line that by expanding Medicare for all, that it would actually take away from seniors. And so 1/3 of senior citizens, 1/3 of Americans broadly are buying into that. And so the Republicans have escalated some of this rhetoric around socialism. They've escalated their kind of defensive attack here.
Okay, Sitao, let's move this on and shift gears to look at the other big political hot potato, immigration. I mean, President Trump, he stood firm on his hardline rhetoric right from the beginning. He hasn't built his wall yet, but he's still talking about it. He's warned that open-border Democrats will allow undocumented migrants to flood into the nation to get hold of the free health care that Greg and I are talking about, swamping the medical centers, denying care to American taxpayers. And of course, as he's saying all this, right on cue, we've got this stream of migrants that are plodding their way steadily upwards into the United States, haven't we?
Yes, indeed. Actually, on this, I very much agree with Professor Nance. I think on the issue of immigration, chances are Republicans probably can galvanize the wider support from their base during the midterm election.
But today, President Trump has said that he is happy for troops along the border with Mexico to shoot at these people as they're trying to get across. Sitao, is that the way to win an election?
Maybe I leave that to Professor Nance. I don't think they are going to shoot.
Let me ask you, Greg, what do you think, Professor Nance? How's that going to go with American voters? He's given permission for troops and police at the border to shoot children, women, people that are crossing the border for a better life.
Yeah, it's one in a string of outlandish and outrageous statements from President Trump. And so many moderates and Democrats, even those that are on the near right, think of it as outlandish. He's of course throwing red meat to his base. There are certain people in certain swing congressional districts that he's got to mobilize to get to the polls. And on the health care kind of disaster, that's not going to get the job done. They're not going to vote based on this. Even the big tax cut for the wealthiest Americans and for corporations haven't trickled down to much of the base. And so your skepticism here, again, is correct. Very much it's coded language, and in this case, very explicit language, to his base to get them out to the polls. It's ridiculous. A former Secretary of Defense, Vietnam veteran, former Senator Chuck Hagel even came out and said, look, this is absolutely ridiculous. And yet there are a lot of Trump's biggest supporters that when they hear things like this, they feel like someone is out looking out for them. Someone in the Capitol is there draining the swamp, there to support me and protect my interests, even when it's something that, that's probably a war crime, as it should be, and it's not something that America should ever stand for, of course, but that's the reality that Americans are dealing with now, and that's one in a string of outlandish and outrageous statements from President Trump.
Okay, I'm glad you're enjoying my skepticism, Greg. Sitao, which will benefit China the most? What does China want? Does it want a strong or a weak Trump come Tuesday?
Well, I think it depends. Trump has been unpredictable, and Trump has been quite determined to use trade as a tool. So that has been very surprising. On the other hand, Trump believes in this transactional approach that works to China's favor. So it depends. So I think what China wants is for President Trump to delink some of the non-trade issues from trade during the trade talk. That's what China wants.
Okay, well, we'll have to wrap it up there, but thank you both very much indeed. In the Beijing studio, Sitao, the chief economist at Deloitte China, and in Shanghai, Greg Nance, Truman Scholar of the University of Chicago. Gentlemen, thank you very much. Well, we'll take a short break now, and when we come back, tensions between China and the US might be thawing, but in Iran, relations are as ice cold as ever. The latest round of reimposed US sanctions are due to hit next week. How bad will it get for Iran, its trading partners, and the region as a whole? Stay with us. Welcome back. Now, Iranians are bracing themselves for the next round of US sanctions, which will come into effect on November the 4th. Well, this round will target the country's vital oil and gas industries, a much more severe hit than the last round of US sanctions, which were reimposed in August and targeted Iran's financial and investment industries. Intending to choke the Islamic Republic's biggest source of income, the US is hoping to apply enough pressure to make Iran change its ways and renegotiate a new nuclear deal. Well, the US has also threatened any country or company trading with Iran with being cut from the American financial system. So what are the repercussions for Iran, its trading partners, and for the region? Will the US strategy work? Well, joining me for the discussion in Tehran is Mousavi, the Professor of Political Science at the University of Tehran, and on the phone from Batumi, Georgia, Richard Weitz, the Director and Senior Fellow at the Center for Political Military Analysis at Hudson Institute. Welcome to both of you. I want to start with you, Richard Weitz, if I may. Why, in your opinion, did Trump pull out of this deal?
Well, I think that, that Trump is flexible on some issues, such as some of the issues you talked about at the beginning of the program. Views towards China seem to be in flux, but his views towards Iran are pretty solid and pretty negative. And so I think it was fairly early going to be apparent that that he wanted to withdraw from the nuclear deal, put a lot of pressure on Iran, as you said. And the thinking they have is that with enough pressure, they will be able to force changes in Iranian foreign policy through an improved nuclear deal and other means.
He's saying that he wants to cut Iran's oil exports to zero. How practical do you think this is? Is that achievable?
Well, it's certainly the goal, but I think that the National Security Advisor, John Bolton, acknowledged yesterday that that is not going to be attained soon, but they're still aiming to achieve substantial reductions, and that appears to already have occurred to a large extent. And the thinking is, even if you don't get them down to zero, if you reduce them to substantially, that still could put enough pressure to coerce the government of Iran into making changes. And the model they have in mind is what happened with North Korea.
Mousavi, it's all making sense, isn't it? He's just trying to put amazing pressure onto Iran so that they sign another deal that's slightly more in America's favor and all will be well.
Well, the problem with that approach is when we're talking about a better deal or renegotiating a deal, we have to abide by the deal we currently have. We have to remember that the current deal is the result of several years of intense diplomacy, and it's actually backed by a UN Security Council resolution and supported by virtually the entire world. And according to the current deal and according to the IAEA, Iran is fully complying by its obligations under the deal. Now, when the United States decides to withdraw, how can Iran trust the U.S. administration into making a new deal? What guarantees would there be for the United States to uphold a new deal? So we have to understand that these pressure and bullying tactics, sometimes they have unintended consequences, and actually they result in possibly the entire counter way of what the Trump administration is intending for.
You say people in Iran have lost patience towards the US, are angry towards the US. You're there in Tehran, you're walking the streets every day. Are they also frustrated with their own government, or is the blame being put wholly on America?
There is definitely pressure. I mean, the Iranian currency, the rial, has lost more than 70% of its value in the past 7 months. So there is definitely pressure, and people are upset. Nevertheless, I think because Iran actually has taken a very constrained approach to how the United States is pressuring Iran, in the sense that when the U.S. decided to withdraw from the nuclear deal, Iran had said priorly that it would also withdraw. Nevertheless, Iran continued with the deal, and I think that is resonating with a large portion of the people, saying that, well, Iran is actually taking a very soft approach, and it's the Trump administration that is taking a very extreme and harsh approach and causing a lot of problems for ordinary Iranians. We have to remember that sanctions, at the end of the day, they hurt ordinary people.
Now, so I'm afraid I'm going to have to stop you short, but thank you very much indeed, and also thank you to Richard Weitz as well. Well, as always, you can follow us on Facebook and Twitter using the handle ThePointWithLX. Download the app as well, CGTN. But from me, that's it. Bye-bye, and thank you for your company.